Hey guys, I wanted to start today by, just sort of quickly talking about a question that one of you asked in response to the last video. And the question went like this. It seems like sometimes free trade based on comparative advantage hurts certain individuals. And it also seems like sometimes solving collective action problems hurts particular individuals. And if that's true, then it seems like free trade based on comparative advantage and solving collective action problems might not be legitimate in the way that I described in the last video. So what's wrong, right? That's the question. And I like this question because this question shows what I think is a pretty common misunderstanding of the way that the economics of collective action problems and and free trade is supposed to work. All right, so let's talk about free trade first. Um, Most often, when people talk about free trade, what they're talking about is agreements between different countries to trade freely with each other, and that is one aspect of free trade. All of the things that we said about comparative advantage and its benefits apply to countries trading with each other. However, that is not the complete idea of free trade. When we talk about free trade based on comparative advantage, we're not just talking about countries, we're also talking about individuals trading with each other. All right. In fact, the examples I gave you were about individuals. All right. So consider the following situation. Um, China has comparative advantage in manufacturing over the United States. Okay, that's true. Because of this, the United States stops manufacturing, and instead they start purchasing manufactured goods from China. That's also true. And one result of that is that Americans who work in manufacturing, who work in factories, end up losing their jobs because there aren't as many American factories anymore. And so it seems like those individuals who lose their jobs are not benefiting from free trade based on comparative advantage. But this is a mistake, all right? And here's why it's a mistake. It's a mistake because those people don't have comparative advantage in manufacturing. That's why they're losing their job, right? They're losing their job because individuals who live in China, who work in Chinese factories, have comparative advantage in those areas. The Americans just don't, right? And so the Americans who lose their job, they're not being harmed by trading on the basis of comparative advantage. What they're being harmed by is the fact that they are not trading on the basis of comparative advantage. Okay, so it's important to keep this in mind when you actually get to the United States and you hear what's going on in American politics right now. Our current president, when he was running for election, promised that he was going to bring manufacturing jobs back to America. And of course, he can't do this, right? America does not have comparative advantage in manufacturing. And so the only way he could bring those jobs back is if, he convinced the Congress to pass a law that regulated the economy in a way that was contrary to American comparative advantage. And a law like that would destroy all of the benefits of free trade. It would destroy the economy. And so I assume that, Donald Trump is not going to keep this promise. He will not be bringing manufacturing jobs back to America because we don't have comparative advantage at that. All right, so that's the first part of this question. The second part of this question was about collective action problems. And the question is just whether solving a collective action problem is harmful to individuals. And here you have to be careful. Because, in one sense, solving a collective action problem is always harmful to individuals, and that's why we need governments to do it. And here's what I mean when I say that. Think of the prisoner's dilemma again. All right. If Master Criminal Shang Qin does not threaten to kill me and you if we confess our crimes, then I'm free not to confess, or I'm free to confess, right? It's my choice. And I'm better off by confessing. Okay? And if Master Criminal Shang Qin solves this collective action problem, if he prevents me from confessing, then he's forcing me to do something that's worse for me. Right? Because now I end up in a situation where neither of us confesses. I don't confess and you don't confess. And remember, in any situation where you don't confess, if I do confess, I go to prison for 4 fewer years. So I'm being harmed by being forced to confess. Right? That is true. In one sense, the collective action problem, solving the collective action problem, does harm me. It forces me to do something that's contrary to my own interests, or it forces me to do something that I don't have compelling interests to do on my own. However, and this is the important thing to remember, the benefit of solving the collective action problem outweighs the harm of solving the collective action problem. All right, that's how you have to remember collective action problems, okay? The idea of a collective action problem is not that, the situation would be better overall if individuals acted in a particular way. All right, a collective action problem is not just a situation where things would be better on average or overall if individuals acted in ways that they would not on their own have good reason to act in. All right? That is not a collective action problem. A collective action problem is a situation in which each individual will benefit from all of the individuals acting in ways that they don't have a compelling reason to act in on their own. All right? And so you don't want to confuse these two ideas, okay? If you think about collective action problems in the wrong way, all right, so look at the screen right now. Look at the sentence on the top of the screen. If you think that is what a collective action problem is, then you're going to get confused, because solving a collective action problem is actually going to be bad for a lot of people. But if you think about collective action problems in the second way, in the correct way, then solving a collective action problem will have benefits for each individual that outweighs the harm that solving the collective action problem causes to each individual. All right. Now, the student who asked this question focused on the elevator situation at DuPont. All right. So think about being on the elevator, or trying to get on the elevator on the 28th floor of DuPont. And, everybody pushes the up button on the elevator when they want to go down. Okay. It's just what everybody does. And the reason they do this is because, if they don't push the up button, a lot of times the elevator doesn't stop on the way down on the 28th floor because it's already full. Okay? Now, the student claims that if everyone pushes the down button, this is going to be harmful for the people on the 28th floor. If that's really true, then we don't have a collective action problem here. If that's really true, then the situation is not a situation where everybody's going to be better off if they all start pushing the down button. Okay? In order for this to be a collective action problem, it really has to be the case that each individual has a good reason to push the up button, but if everyone pushed the down button, things would be better. That would be a collective action problem. And so what the student has given is a reason to think that the elevator on the 28th floor of DuPont is not a collective action problem at all. But I think it is one. And here's why. The elevators at DuPont have almost enough space in them to carry everyone who needs to ride on the elevator, right? When you push the up button on the 28th floor and you ride all the way to the top of the building and then back down, most people, all the way up, can get on the elevator. Okay, the elevators are just barely too small to carry all of the people who need them. Now, here's what you have to realize. Um, no matter which button everyone pushes, the elevators are still going to hold the same number of people at any given time. Okay, the elevator is the same size and can carry the same number of passengers at any given moment, whether those passengers are going up or down. But if the people who wanted to go down only ever pushed the down button, each passenger would be on the elevator for less time. Because people wouldn't ride up and then down, people would just ride down. And so the total amount of time spent on the elevator by passengers would decrease on average if everybody just pushed the down button. And what does that mean mathematically? If the elevator can hold the same number of people at any given point in time, but by pushing the down button, each passenger is spending less time on average on the elevator, the mathematical conclusion is that the elevator would transport more passengers over any given interval of time if everyone just pushed the down button. All right? The entire elevator system would be more efficient. It would transport more passengers to the floor they wanted to go to every single minute if everyone just pushed the button in the direction they wanted to go. Now, that would be good for people on the 28th floor. If the elevators really were carrying more people to the floors they wanted to go to every minute, they'd be able to carry more people. And since they were carrying more people, and since the people on them would be spending less time on them, that would just be good for the people on the 28th floor. More of them would be able to ride the elevator, they'd be riding it for less time. And so I think this is a collective action problem. I think this is a case where if everybody pushed the down button, the entire system would work better, even for the people on the 28th floor. However, and this is why there's a real problem here. Now imagine that everybody starts pushing only the down button when they want to go down. Then people on the 28th floor would be better off by cheating. Then they really would be better off by pushing the up button, because they'd be guaranteed to get on the elevator every single time. But, you know, a situation in which everyone pushes the up button when they want to go down is worse for people on the 28th floor than a situation in which everyone only pushes the down button when they want to go down. Okay, that's the main thing. All right, so that's all I wanted to say about that particular question. You know, the main idea behind it, I guess, was just to try to show that, you know, maybe it's impossible for a government to be legitimate according to the terms that I described last time, right? If what is required for a government to be legitimate is that it really be beneficial to all of the individuals that it governs, maybe that's just impossible. Maybe this isn't realistic, and so maybe this is a bad theory of government. But, you know, here's another thing to keep in mind, and this is going to come up a lot over the rest of this class. Governments can actually get a ton of things wrong from the classically liberal point of view and still be hugely beneficial to each individual in society. And I think the American government is actually a pretty good example of this. It's pretty hard for me to think of any individuals I know who are worse off because there's an American government. In America, I mean, right? It's hard for me to think of Americans who are worse off because there's a government, right? The government does lots of things that seem to me to be bad for me. They make me pay taxes, and, you know, they arrest people if they commit crimes, and when you get arrested, that's harmful to you, right? The government does all sorts of things that harm individuals. But, you know, think of the alternative, right? Imagine the government stops doing all of the things that it does, and people in the United States lived with no government at all. Imagine what that would be like. there would be no roads, there would be no public transportation, there would be no schools. If there were no schools, there would be no technology, right? That's a way worse situation. And so, when we're talking about the legitimacy of government, legitimacy, like liberalism, is something that comes on a spectrum, right? And, from a classically liberal point of view, the legitimacy of a government is connected to how that government benefits each individual. Governments can do a really bad job and still be a little bit beneficial to individuals, right? And so even really bad governments can be legitimate to a point from the classically liberal point of view, all right? This really is a theory that allows us to talk about real governments and how legitimate they are, okay? All right, so what I really want to get to today is starting to talk about some of the actual historical documents that were written by the people who, originally founded the American system of government. And I just want to show you very quickly the extent to which they were relying on classically liberal ideals when they invented the American system of government, all right? So on the screen right now, you can see a passage from the American Declaration of Independence, all right? So this is a letter that was written in 1776 by Thomas Jefferson. It was signed by the members of the Continental Congress in the United States, and they sent this letter to the King of England to explain that they now considered themselves an independent country and to explain their reasons for that. And pretty close to the beginning of the document, here's what Thomas Jefferson says, all right? So here's the quote on the screen. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." All right, now I'm going to stop there for a second, and I want you to pay attention to what this says. So, right from the start, Thomas Jefferson is telling us that we have certain rights and that those rights are unalienable. What that means is that you cannot be separated from them. Okay? In other words, the government should not take them from you. It would be wrong for the government to suppress them, right? And now it lists what those rights are. They include life, liberty, in other words, the freedom to live your life as you choose according to your own interests, all right? And the pursuit of happiness. Now, this is a funny phrase. He's actually copying here from a philosopher named John Locke. John Locke did not say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He said life, liberty, and property, all right? And Thomas Jefferson seems to have decided that if you had life, liberty, and property, that was really all you needed to pursue whatever happiness you were interested in, right? So he's changed the language. But here's the fundamental idea of the Declaration of Independence, is that every individual ought to have their life, their freedom to pursue their own way of existing in the world on the basis of their own interests, and their property and their happiness, right? You have a right to all of these things, and governments should not take them from you. Now, look at what it says next. "To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." So here's what it says. The function of government is to provide conditions in which all of these rights and liberties are protected, and governments are only legitimate if they're the sort of government that the people who are being governed would consent to, all right? This is just exactly the classically liberal theory of government, all right? Look at what he says next. "Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So there you have it. The whole function of government is to provide people with, conditions in which their lives are safe, they have the liberty to pursue their life as they choose, they have property rights. Any government that is not doing this is illegitimate. Any government that is not doing this well enough that a rational citizen would consent to it is illegitimate. And yeah, right, that's the classically liberal theory of government in a nutshell. All right. Now, if you keep reading the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, lists a whole bunch of things that he thinks the King of England has done wrong that make his government illegitimate. And I'm listing 3 of them here, all right? So here they are. Number 1, the Declaration of Independence says that the king has refused to pass laws of pressing importance for the public good for large districts of people. All right? In other words, the king has not passed those laws that one must pass to create civil society, right? To govern large districts of people or to solve collective action problems among large districts of people. That's what Thomas Jefferson's saying here. Number 2, the king has dissolved elected or representative legislative bodies. All right, now, why does that matter? Because elections are one of the ways that people have of showing that they consent, or that most of them consent, to what the government is doing. And so dissolving representative legislative bodies is a way of separating the government from the consent of the citizens, which makes it illegitimate. All right, look at number 3. He has cut off trade, imposed taxes, destroyed the lives of our people, and excited domestic insurrections. All right, so what's he doing? He's mismanaging the economy. He's preventing people from trading freely with each other on the basis of comparative advantage. He's cutting off trade. He's imposing taxes. Well, we saw the economic effect of using redistributive taxes, right? They destroy free trade based on comparative advantage. And, says Thomas Jefferson, by doing that, he's harmed the lives of the people. Moreover, he has excited domestic insurrection. So not only is he destroying free trade on the basis of comparative advantage, he's also destroying civil society. All right? And so, again, everything Thomas Jefferson is saying in the Declaration of Independence, you can understand in classical liberal terms. All right? If you look at the American Bill of Rights, here's a list of some of the rights that are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. Okay, freedom of speech and press. Now, we talked about this. Free access to information is essential to a classically liberal society, and it's guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. All right, number 2, freedom of assembly. Again, we talked about this last time. This is something that is essential to a classically liberal society, guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. Okay, the Bill of Rights specifically says life, liberty, and property. So it does not say pursuit of happiness now it specifically says property. And again, all 3 of these things are fundamental, as we talked about last time, to a classically liberal society. Okay, among all of the property that you are entitled to weapons in the Bill of Rights, and you are entitled to military defense. And part of the reason for that is that you are guaranteed security in your person and in your home and in your effects. Again, we talked about this last time. These are essential conditions to civil society and free trade. Okay? You're guaranteed that if you do something wrong, there will be a trial by jury, that there will be due process of law, that the government cannot just take away your liberty without good reason. And that even if they do, they cannot use any cruel, unusual, or excessive punishments. All right, and so you can see, this is a document that's committed to guaranteeing people's rights and liberties, even if they're criminals. Right? This is a great example of a classically liberal document. All right, so the reason I'm showing you this is just to give you evidence now that classical liberalism is the point of view from which the people who came up with the American system of government were thinking. Now, I'm going to show you a slightly longer passage, This is from something called The Federalist. Now, The Federalist is something that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in our future videos. This is a series of essays that were written by three different gentlemen, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. And they were written at the time that the American Constitution was being debated. So the Constitution has been written. People are trying to decide whether or not they support it, whether or not they want it to be their new government. And Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote The Federalist to try to persuade people to adopt the Constitution. And in the very first essay from The Federalist, Federalist 1, this is what Alexander Hamilton says. He says, "I am clearly of the opinion it is in your interest to adopt the U.S. Constitution." So, notice, he thinks that the U.S. Constitution is going to serve the interest of each individual. That's what he's saying here. All right? I'm convinced that this is the safest course for your liberty, your dignity, and your happiness. Now remember, the way that people like Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson are talking about the pursuit of happiness, this is like a code word for property rights, all right? And so, again, what he's saying here is that having your liberty protected, having property rights, and being able to live in a society that confers dignity upon you, those things are in your interest, and the U.S. Constitution will guarantee them. Okay, so that just is exactly the classically liberal idea of government. All right. Now, I want you to look at the short sentence in the middle of the screen and then the second paragraph there, which is all in capital letters. All right, because this is really interesting. I propose in a series of papers, in other words, the rest of the Federalist Papers, to discuss the following interesting particulars. The utility of the Union to your political prosperity. In other words, he wants to explain why accepting the U.S. Constitution is going to help you individually. Okay. Number 2, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve that Union. Okay. In other words, the problems with the current system of government that make it less good than the Constitution. All right. The necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed. In other words, he wants to explain why the government has to be as powerful as the Constitution makes it, or perhaps even more powerful. Okay. And then he talks about the system of government. So he says, to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of Republican government. All right. Now, Republican government is a way of setting up government. A Republican government is one where the government is controlled by representatives who are elected by individual citizens. Okay. So the individual citizens vote for people, and those people who are voted for are then in charge of the government. That's a Republican system of government. So I want you to notice what Alexander Hamilton's saying here. Alexander Hamilton is saying that if you set up the government in that way, if the government has the right structure, then it will have the right amount of power and it will follow classically liberal principles. All right, now I'm not going to tell you why he thinks that yet. You'll see later on. But here I want to tell you, this is the most important idea in the entire history of the American system of government. The idea is that if you set up the institution of government correctly, if the government has the correct form, that is enough to guarantee that the society is classically liberal. Okay, that's the main idea here. So the main idea is you want a classically liberal government. How do you get one? You make sure that the government has the correct institutions. That's the theory. All right? And now he says something really, really interesting. Okay? He says this government, the Constitution, is analogous to your own state constitution. In other words, the individual states in the United States already have their own governments, and what Alexander Hamilton is going to try to convince you of is that the American Constitution is similar to the state governments that already exist. Now, this is confusing. This is very, very weird. Because if the state governments are already like the US Constitution, and if the US Constitution already guarantees, because of its structure, a classically liberal society, then why don't individual state constitutions already guarantee a classically liberal society? Why do we need a US Constitution at all? That's the question that you should be asking. And Alexander Hamilton is going to try to answer it. The answer to that question is called federalism. It's the idea that the Federalist Papers get their title from. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in a couple of videos. And then notice the last line here. The additional security which its adoption will afford to the preservation of that species of government, to liberty and to property. In other words, again, the whole justification for the US system of government is that it preserves civil society, liberty, and property rights that allow you to have free trade on the basis of comparative advantage. Okay, so there's the evidence, right? You look at the things that the people who founded the American system of government actually wrote, and what they're trying to tell you is that they believed in classical liberalism and that they supported the American system of government because they thought that that system of government would protect classically liberal ideas. Okay? Now, on the screen now, you can see a bunch of links. These are links that you should have. The first link is for a pretty good free copy of the Federalist Papers. All right, so this is just a PDF that you can download. It has the complete text of the Federalist with a long, pretty detailed introduction, and it's free. Okay. The second link is an annotated edition of the U.S. Constitution. So this is the edition of the Constitution that was printed by the American Congress. It's extremely long. The annotations are extremely detailed, but it is also extremely informative. Okay. And then I've given you a link to the official U.S. government website for all of the most important government documents we're going to be looking at. So this just has, a very basic edition of the Constitution and of the Bill of Rights and of the Declaration of Independence, those sorts of things. And then the last link is a link to the Articles of Confederation, which is the system of government that existed in the United States before the Constitution. All right, so in my next video, we're going to start talking about the Articles of Confederation. We're going to talk about what it does, and we're going to talk about why it failed. Okay, so if you have time before you watch my next video, you should read Federalist 1, the first essay in the Federalist Papers, and then you should look at the Articles of Confederation. And I'll be talking next time about the Articles of Confederation. All right? I hope you guys are having a good time. I'm going to be back in Chengdu in a little bit more than a week, and so I hope I get to see many of you then. All right, bye-bye.